So let's continue with the tools to prioritize adaptation and resilience interventions. So these are interventions in many ways. Intervention meant to be a good thing to increase your resilience, but also means it's a disruption to business as usual that you may be happy with. And these are often based on risks for the future that may be coming down, and you may not be a big fan of future risks. Human mind estimates risks, perceives risks in many different ways. Almost every human being wants to save money for the future, and we don't really have a switch as to how much may be enough for us, for the kids, for the posterity, and so on. But that doesn't mean we will pay for the future of the environment, because it's often a shared resource. You may buy insurance for your car, but not insurance for the future of the environment, right? So these are kind of tricky things where interventions can have oppositions, resistances, and so on. So net present value calculation in this tool, then you're computing a sum over starting date to asset lifetime, whatever the intervention you're making, adaptation choice you're making. So 1 over 1 plus rho. Rho is again the discount rate to the y, and benefit y minus cost of y. So system level critical analysis then is in a networked and interconnected system. The resilience of each asset depends on the resilience of the whole system. So you cannot make the system resilient unless every component of the system is resilient. Even perfectly functional power plants can stop producing if the transmission system is damaged, for example. So the resilience of each asset in a system must be determined from the system's needs and depends on the importance within the system. A simple approach to prioritizing interventions is assigning a level of criticality to assets based on their capacity. That's already a kind of a call that you have to say this is a critical asset. For example, construction standards are often higher for primary roads such as highways and freeways than for tertiary roads that have much lower volumes of traffic. Similarly, strengthening or retrofitting actions can be prioritized by focusing on the largest assets in the system. However, this approach is limited in that it does not include information on the type of service the asset provides. For example, a freeway that provides access to a camping area is less critical than the one that leads to the main port or hospital. So you can see there are layers of what criticality means, even for a single entity like a highway. Or the role that the asset plays in overall network functionality. Is this a nice highway between 2 points but is not connected to anything else? So if it's damaged, then the system can still keep running at some level. Sophisticated approaches to prioritizing infrastructure assets model infrastructure system as a network of nodes and links. This is a very nice kind of approach. There are a lot of good papers and studies looking at system resilience by perturbing the nodes and links to see how the perturbation propagates and how the system recovers and so on. The railway network of India, for example. A criticality analysis can identify the bridges and road segments that are most important for the whole system so that resources can be focused on them. Figure C1 that will see toolbox C is an example from Tanzania that we had looked at, international lines, domestic lines, and so on. Approaches based on criticality analysis can provide similar outcomes as a cost-benefit analysis. They can help decision makers estimate the costs and benefits of investing in different parts of a network and calculate a net present value and or benefit cost ratio for each asset, making it possible to prioritize the highest returns. We'll see figure K.1, which shows the losses from a 4-week disruption of different roads in Tanzania, ranked from the most to the least important road, with a given budget for retrofitting and strengthening. Such an analysis can provide a prioritized list of roads that should be reinforced. So these analyses are used to actually make calls on who gets priority attention when there is a disruption or a damage. So that's figure K.1, benefits from strengthening different road segments in Tanzania considering their criticality. So consumption of losses caused by a 4-week disruption in each road in US dollars, millions of US dollars. This is from 2019 analysis. So you can see this number here, roads ranked from the most to the least important. Most important has consumption losses caused by the 4-week disruption at almost 125 million dollars, and then drops off to the tail here to just about a couple of $1 million. So this analysis, if reliable, can obviously provide a way to prioritize funding to recover from a perturbation. So in that sense, the resilience of the road is higher. Scenario analysis and decision making under uncertainty. Regardless of the quality of data and models available, long asset lifetimes and deep uncertainty about the future exacerbate the changes of sound decisions making sound decision making in risk management. Scenario analysis and tools for decision making under uncertainty have been designed to deliver acceptable outcomes in the largest range of possible futures instead of optimizing for a single future scenario. It's just not possible to pick a single future scenario. They all have uncertainties, they all have likelihoods as depicted by the IPCC assessment reports, and they depend critically on the choices we make to reduce emissions, to switch to renewables, to switch to EVs, maybe even reduce meat consumption, emissions from food waste, and so on and so forth. So lots of uncertainties there in each scenario, so you have to choose a few what-if scenarios for the future and storylines to make your decisions under uncertainty. The first step is stress testing available options under a range of plausible conditions without requiring a decision or agreement on how likely these conditions are. Okay, so you just take them as a given and build your decision system on that. The methods then repeatedly evaluate decision options under different sets of assumptions, including low likelihood but high consequence events that we talked about. Could be just like once in 200-year event versus once in 50-year event or once in 10-year event, remembering that climate change will keep changing the frequencies themselves often. Okay. This process promotes consensus around decisions, which can help decision makers manage deep uncertainty. Decisions have to be made. There is always uncertainty, and people, especially farmers, do make decisions season by season based on complete uncertainties and their own risk perception based on past experiences and their drive to take risks and so on and so forth. By performing analysis in this way, decision makers can debate important questions such as what trade-offs should be made between robustness and, for example, cost. Is it possible to add safety margins to a project to hedge against surprises? Which options offer the most flexibility for responding to unexpected changes in the future? What should be done in case of failure? Robust solutions can usually be achieved by selecting options that minimize the potential for regret. Here, regret is defined as the difference between what a given decision would achieve and what the best decision could have achieved. Okay, so that's a no regret decision there. For example, there is a regret from having strengthened a bridge to resist a strong earthquake if no such earthquake occurs during the lifetime of the bridge. So you invested in strengthening the bridge, but nothing happened. This happened with tsunamis. In the Indian Ocean, tsunami is a low probability, high impact event, but you have invested to monitor tsunamis and nothing happens after the big one in 2004, which killed several 100,000 in Thailand and then tens of thousands in India and so on. Okay. For example, there is a regret from having strengthened the bridge, as we said, if for earthquake and the earthquake doesn't happen. Similarly, there is a regret from not having strengthened the bridge if a strong earthquake does happen and the bridge is destroyed. So you will think we didn't strengthen it enough, or we didn't strengthen it at all and saved money, but we lost the bridge, right? Figure K2 represent this approach, which is based on the robust decision-making methodology, RDM. It suggests starting from existing plans and working with decision makers and stakeholders to define what would be considered a failure or unacceptable outcome. These can be defined in pure economic terms. For example, net present value is negative, or in more complex ways, the NPV is negative, or the project creates unsustainable debt or bad health consequences for the population, and so on. So you can think of many examples where pure economic considerations can lead to certain choices. It's then possible to identify scenarios in which the existing plan would fail. The vulnerabilities identified through this process can help identify options and opportunities to reduce or manage them and to make the considered system less vulnerable. So here is figure K2, then I'll go back. The RDM methodology to identify vulnerabilities and options to mitigate them. So this is the robust decision-making methodology. It's a loop, so you can start anywhere. So you say you'll start from a plan, stakeholder meeting to develop a set of scenarios, stakeholder meeting to define success and or failure. So stakeholders have to say, yes, this was a great success, or say this just didn't work. Determine in which scenarios the current plan fails. Determine the drivers of failure eliciting vulnerability, and adjust the plan to cope with the vulnerabilities that have been identified, and then start from a plan again. So that's a loop. Okay, so this approach usually provides a ranking of projects or single metric measure project returns, but it does not identify vulnerabilities and options to minimize the rankings or the errors or losses or misalignment of funding versus actual risks. It's then up to decision makers to decide whether the vulnerabilities are too big to be accepted and whether investing in the identified options is even worthwhile. Okay, so then it brings us to defining a target level of residual risk. You will make plans, you will take financial considerations, return on investments, benefits for the future, etc., and then you still have to know about what risk is still left uncovered. Okay, for example, a city of Mumbai may get sea level projections of 2 meters by 2100, and let's say the financial cost of adapting or planning to protect against 2 meters sea level is just too high, so you make a compromise and protect against 1 meter of sea level rise, and then sea level rise accelerates and you hit that target even before 2100, in which case you don't even have to wait for 2 meter sea level rise. You are already beginning to face the consequences of planning for 1 meter sea level rise, right? So residual risk in that sense can be something that may not be necessarily reversible. Risk cannot be brought to zero in that sense, so you are going to leave some residual risk behind. The appropriate approach to manage risk is always a combination of prevention to avoid disasters and impacts, and preparedness to manage the risks and impacts that cannot be prevented at an acceptable cost. So this old cliche again of managing the unavoidable and avoiding the unmanageable often doesn't work out. You may leave both of them incomplete. The right balance between these two pillars depends on whether we are dealing with frequent or rare events. So 1 generation or 2 generations may go by without any sea level rise consequence, for example, and they think they made a great investment, and then the next generation gets hit hard and you have failed them. So that's something you have to worry about. For changes in average conditions and small and frequent shocks, it's usually best to focus on preventing the impacts, for example, by retrofitting housing and infrastructure to manage higher temperatures, or by building dikes to prevent floods, which is what, like a sea wall that I mentioned. But for the more extreme and infrequent events or places with low population and asset density or more limited economic value, you are deciding on people's protections for the future based on their economic value in some sense. The cost of prevention may quickly become unaffordable. In these cases, preparedness becomes an increasingly important option for many assets, including electricity distribution structure, some roads and other transport infrastructure. It may be cheaper to accept and be ready to repair damage quickly after disasters than to try strengthen them. So when you always use economic considerations, which is reality, then obviously someone will pay the price for the choices made, but one can say somebody always pays the price, right? So this is still a bit longer, so let me leave this here and we'll come back to figure K3 in the next podcast as we continue with this toolbox that we are discussing. Okay, so see you in the next podcast.